A cold wind swept across the barren landscape, cutting through the plains like a blade. The snow had begun to fall, small flakes drifting down in a silent curtain that muffled the sounds of the distant hills. The lone cabin on the edge of the prairie sat like a fortress against the storm, smoke curling lazily from the chimney, promising warmth and safety. Inside, the rancher moved with practiced calm, checking the traps and tending to the animals, his eyes scanning the horizon even as the wind howled outside. He was a man used to solitude, the kind of man who had spent years learning to read the signs of the land and the weather, the tracks of animals, and the faint footprints of strangers. He knew every ridge, every hollow, and every hidden danger, yet even he could feel the weight of the storm pressing against him, reminding him that nature was an unpredictable force. Suddenly, a faint cry reached his ears, carried on the wind. At first, he thought it was the howl of a distant wolf, but there was something different, something human. He paused, listening intently, the creaking floorboards beneath his boots sounding louder than ever in the silence. The sound came again, more distinct this time, a small, desperate voice calling for help. Without hesitation, he grabbed his coat and stepped outside into the blizzard. The wind cut across his face, stinging and biting, but he pressed forward, following the sound. His boots sank into the deepening snow, each step a struggle, but he was driven by a sense of duty that went beyond mere habit. As he moved across the frozen plains, the outline of a small figure became visible against the white expanse. It was a young girl, her clothes soaked and thin against the cold, her face pale and streaked with tears. She had fallen to her knees in the snow, shivering violently, and the rancher knew time was critical. He knelt beside her, wrapping her in his coat and lifting her gently, feeling the weight of her small body against his chest. The girl looked up at him, eyes wide with fear and gratitude, and he whispered reassurances, though he knew she could barely hear him over the howling wind. With careful steps, he began the journey back to his cabin, each movement deliberate to keep them both safe. The wind threatened to knock him off balance, snowflakes stinging their faces, but he pressed on, drawing on every ounce of strength and experience. The girl clung to him, weak and exhausted, her small hands barely able to grasp his coat. He focused on the tracks he had memorized, avoiding hidden drifts and sudden drops, moving with the precision of someone who had spent a lifetime in the wilderness. Inside the cabin, the fire blazed brightly, filling the room with warmth and a sense of safety that had been absent from the frozen plains. The rancher set the girl down gently on a blanket near the hearth, checking her for injuries and offering her a cup of warm broth. She drank greedily, the warmth seeping into her body, reviving her strength bit by bit. He watched her carefully, noting the way her shivering gradually subsided and how her eyes began to sparkle with life again. In those moments, the silence of the cabin was broken by a quiet sense of connection, a recognition of the bond that had formed between them through hardship and survival. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but within the small wooden walls, there was a sense of calm and security. The rancher moved to tend to the animals, making sure the horses were fed and the livestock secure, while the girl rested near the fire, gradually regaining her composure. He reflected on the events of the day, the unexpected turn of fate that had brought her into his life, and the way human kindness could make a difference even in the harshest conditions. Memories of his own past flickered through his mind, times when he had been lost, vulnerable, or in need of help, and the way strangers had stepped forward to aid him. He realized that now it was his turn to be that stranger, the one who provided safety, warmth, and care to someone who had none. The hours passed, and the storm showed no signs of abating, yet inside the cabin, there was a feeling of resilience, a shared determination. He spoke softly to the girl, asking her name, her story, gently coaxing her to talk, to open up. She told him in broken sentences about how she had become separated from her family, lost in the blizzard while trying to reach a nearby town. Her voice trembled, but there was a spark of hope as she realized she was no longer alone. The rancher listened carefully, offering words of encouragement and comfort. He assured her that they would survive the storm, that she was safe, and that together they could make it through the night. As the night deepened, the wind outside intensified, rattling the cabin and sending shadows dancing across the walls. The rancher kept watch, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond the windows, listening for any signs of danger, human or otherwise. He knew that the prairie could be unforgiving, that storms could hide predators, and that every moment required vigilance. Yet within the cabin, there was warmth, safety, and the growing trust between two people who had met under extraordinary circumstances. Morning arrived slowly, the first rays of light struggling to pierce the heavy clouds. The storm had not completely passed, but the snow had softened, and the rancher saw an opportunity to help the girl reach safety. He prepared provisions, wrapping her in additional layers, and they set out together toward the distant town, moving carefully across the snow-covered plains. The girl walked with him, her steps faltering at first, but gradually gaining strength as she trusted in his guidance. He pointed out safe paths, warned her of hidden dangers, and encouraged her to keep moving. Along the way, they encountered tracks that told stories of animals, travelers, and the relentless passage of time. The rancher shared his knowledge, teaching her how to read the signs of the land, how to listen to the wind, and how to observe without panic. In those moments, there was more than survival. There was learning, connection, and the passing down of wisdom that had been honed over a lifetime. Hours passed, and the town came into view, a cluster of buildings offering shelter, warmth, and human connection. The girl's face lit up with relief, her exhaustion mingled with joy. She turned to the rancher, gratitude shining in her eyes, and he felt a sense of fulfillment unlike anything he had known. He had risked his own safety, endured the storm, and guided her to security, and in doing so, he had forged a bond that would remain in memory forever. The townsfolk greeted them, shocked at the tale of survival and bravery. They welcomed the girl back to safety and praised the rancher for his heroism, acknowledging the courage, skill, and compassion it took to perform such an act. The girl's family arrived, tears streaming down their faces, overwhelmed with gratitude for the man who had saved their loved one. The rancher remained modest, brushing off the accolades, focusing instead on the simple truth that he had done what any person should do when confronted with another in need. That night, the cabin felt emptier, quieter, yet filled with the warmth of memories and the knowledge that he had made a difference. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the walls, and the rancher reflected on the nature of human kindness, bravery, and the bonds formed through shared adversity. He thought about the journey, the snowstorm, the fear, the courage, and the eventual triumph, realizing that moments of crisis could reveal the best in people, the depths of compassion, and the heights of heroism. Sleep eventually claimed him, but even in dreams, the memory of the girl's frightened face and the quiet bond they had formed lingered. The prairie outside was still harsh and unyielding, but within, there was a sense of hope, of purpose, and of the enduring human spirit. The rancher awoke the next day to the sounds of life returning to the town, the wind less fierce, the snow softened, and the sun breaking through the clouds. He knew that the world continued, that challenges would arise, but that acts of courage and compassion could create ripples far beyond the immediate moment. As he stepped outside, surveying the land, he carried with him the memory of the night, the girl, and the survival that had been achieved through trust, skill, and the willingness to act. The journey had tested him, pushed him to limits of endurance, but it had also reaffirmed the fundamental truths of connection, responsibility, and humanity. He walked across the plains, his eyes scanning the horizon, aware that each step was a testament to the choices made, the risks taken, and the lives touched. And in that vast, snow-covered expanse, there was a quiet satisfaction, a deep understanding that even in the harshest of conditions, courage, kindness, and perseverance could prevail. The days that followed were quieter, but the quiet carried weight. The storm had passed, leaving behind a land reshaped by snow and silence. The rancher returned to his routine, yet nothing felt the same. Every familiar sound seemed sharper, every empty moment heavier, as if the prairie itself remembered what had happened. He repaired fences, checked water sources, and tended to his horses, but his thoughts often drifted back to the girl and the way fear had transformed into trust in her eyes. He told himself it was over, that she was safe now, yet the sense of responsibility lingered like a shadow that refused to fade. In town, life resumed its steady rhythm. The girl was reunited with her family, but the storm had taken more than time from them. Supplies were low, and rumors spread quickly through the settlement. Some said bandits had been moving closer, taking advantage of the harsh weather to strike when people were weak. Others whispered about missing travelers, wagons found abandoned on frozen trails, their contents scattered or gone. The rancher listened but said little, observing more than speaking, storing each detail away. He knew the land, and he knew men, and both could be dangerous when underestimated. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted the snow with streaks of gold and red, a rider approached his cabin. The horse was tired, its breath heavy, steam rising from its nostrils. The man riding it looked worse, his face drawn tight with urgency and fear. He dismounted clumsily and barely managed to stay upright. The rancher stepped forward, steadying him, and guided him inside without questions. The man collapsed onto a chair, hands trembling as he spoke. Another child was missing. This time, a boy. He had been sent ahead to deliver supplies to a nearby homestead and never arrived. Tracks vanished near a ravine known for unstable ice and narrow passes. The rancher felt the weight settle in his chest again. He had hoped the storm was the end of it, a single cruel chapter closed, but the land had other plans. He prepared quickly, packing food, rope, and medical supplies, moving with the efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. The man watched him with a mix of hope and guilt, knowing the danger he was asking another to face. The rancher offered no promises, only a nod, and stepped back into the cold. The trail to the ravine was treacherous. Snow hid cracks in the ground, and the wind had carved deceptive paths that could lead a careless traveler straight into disaster. He followed faint tracks, sometimes losing them, sometimes finding small signs others would miss. A broken branch, a scuffed stone, a faint impression where snow had settled unevenly. Hours passed, daylight fading, the cold biting deeper with every step. He found the wagon first, tilted on its side, one wheel shattered against a rock. Supplies were scattered, some crushed, some taken. The boy was nowhere in sight. Near the ravine's edge, the rancher found signs of a struggle. The snow was disturbed, footprints overlapping, some heavy, some light. Bandits. He crouched low, scanning the area, listening to the wind and the silence beneath it. From below, faint sounds rose, not voices, but movement. He descended carefully, using rope to steady himself, every muscle tense. At the bottom, hidden among rocks and frozen brush, he found a small camp. 2 men stood guard, their weapons close at hand. Between him, bound and frightened, was the boy. The rancher did not rush. He waited, watching their patterns, their habits, the moments when attention drifted. Patience had kept him alive before, and he trusted it now. When the opportunity came, he acted swiftly, disabling one man before the other could react. The fight was brutal and short, fueled by desperation and resolve. When it was over, the bandits lay unconscious, bound with their own ropes. The boy stared up at the rancher, eyes wide, disbelief mixing with relief. They did not linger. The rancher freed the boy, wrapped him in a spare coat, and began the climb back up. The boy was shaken but uninjured, and with guidance, he followed, step by careful step. By the time they reached the trail, darkness had fallen. The cold was relentless, but the rancher kept them moving, sharing his food, encouraging the boy with calm words and steady presence. The town lights appeared hours later, a welcome sight against the endless dark. The return sparked a reaction stronger than before. The town gathered, whispers turning into open praise and gratitude. Parents held their children tighter, and even those who had never spoken to the rancher before looked at him with new respect. Yet with the relief came fear. If bandits were operating so close, The town was not safe. The storm had exposed weaknesses, and the land would not forgive complacency. Meetings were held, plans discussed, defenses strengthened. The rancher found himself at the center of it, his experience sought, his words weighed carefully. He did not seek leadership, but it found him regardless. He spoke plainly, urging preparation, vigilance, and cooperation. Alone, none of them could stand against the dangers beyond their borders, but together, they had a chance. As days turned into weeks, the town changed. Patrols were organized, supply routes adjusted, and communication improved. The rancher continued his work, splitting time between his land and the town, a bridge between solitude and community. He trained volunteers, teaching them how to read tracks, how to move quietly, how to respect the land rather than challenge it blindly. The girl he had saved visited often, bringing small gifts, bread, or letters written in careful handwriting. The boy followed him like a shadow, eager to learn, absorbing every lesson with determination. Yet peace on the frontier was never permanent. One evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, a distant fire lit the horizon. A homestead, far from town, burning. The rancher did not wait for discussion. He gathered a small group and rode out, the urgency clear in every movement. The ride was hard and fast, the smell of smoke growing stronger with each mile. When they arrived, the scene was chaos. Buildings smoldered, animals scattered, and the people who lived there were huddled together, shaken and injured. They worked through the night, extinguishing flames, treating wounds, and securing what remained. The attack bore the marks of the same bandits, emboldened and desperate. The rancher knew this would not end until the threat was removed completely. The land demanded resolution, and half measures would only invite more suffering. Back in town, the decision was made. They would confront the bandits, not recklessly, but with planning and unity. The rancher helped map the terrain, identify likely hideouts, and prepare for a final confrontation. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on him, but he accepted it, understanding that leadership was not about seeking glory but about standing firm when others could not. On the eve of their departure, the town gathered in quiet solidarity. There were no speeches, no grand gestures, only shared looks and unspoken understanding. The rancher returned to his cabin briefly, standing by the fire, reflecting on how far things had shifted from the days of solitude he once knew. He did not regret it. The bonds formed through hardship had given his life new meaning, a purpose rooted not just in survival, but in protection and care. As dawn broke, they set out, moving as one across the plains. The land stretched wide before them, cold and unforgiving, but no longer empty. It was filled with resolve, with the quiet strength of people who refused to be broken by fear. The rancher rode at the front, eyes scanning the horizon, every sense alert. Whatever lay ahead, he would face it not alone, but with a community forged in the harshest of trials. And as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the snow, it became clear that the story unfolding on the frontier was no longer just about one man. It was about resilience, unity, and the choice to stand against darkness, no matter the cost. The ride toward the bandits' territory was long and heavy with unspoken tension. Each rider carried not just weapons, but memories of what had already been lost. The rancher led them through narrow passes and frozen valleys, choosing routes that avoided open ground. He understood that surprise would be their strongest ally. The land seemed to hold its breath as they moved, wind whispering across the plains, snow crunching softly beneath hooves. No one spoke unless necessary. Every sound mattered. By midday, they reached a ridge overlooking a cluster of rocks and half-buried structures at the edge of a canyon. Smoke rose faintly, almost invisible against the gray sky. The rancher raised his hand, signaling the group to stop. Through a scope, he confirmed what he already suspected. This was the bandits' base. Horses were tied near the rocks, guards positioned carelessly, confident in their isolation. That confidence would be their weakness. The plan was simple but dangerous. Split into small units, approach from multiple angles, disable their escape routes, and end the threat quickly. The rancher assigned roles with quiet authority. No one questioned him. They trusted his judgment, because it had already saved lives. As they separated, moving into position, the rancher felt the familiar tightening in his chest that came before conflict. Fear was there, but so was clarity. The first signal came as a flash of movement on the far side of the camp. A guard dropped silently, pulled into the shadows before he could raise alarm. The second followed moments later. The rancher advanced with his group, each step measured, each breath controlled. When the fight began, it was sudden and violent. Shouts cut through the stillness, weapons clashed, and the calm of the canyon shattered. The bandits were more numerous than expected, but disorganized. Some tried to flee, only to find paths blocked. Others fought back with desperation, driven by survival rather than strategy. The rancher moved through the chaos with focus, protecting his people, directing them when confusion threatened to take hold. He saw fear in their eyes, not weakness, but the raw human response to danger. He understood it, shared it, and pushed through it. During the struggle, a sudden explosion echoed from the canyon wall. One of the bandits had set fire to stored supplies, attempting to create chaos and cover. Flames leapt upward, smoke choking the air. Visibility dropped, and panic rippled through both sides. The rancher shouted orders, guiding his group away from the fire and toward higher ground. In the confusion, he realized someone was missing. The boy. The same boy he had rescued weeks earlier had followed them, desperate to prove himself. Without hesitation, the rancher turned back toward the smoke. He found the boy near a collapsed structure, trapped by fallen debris. Fear etched across his face. Flames crept closer, heat pressing in from all sides. The rancher worked quickly, lifting heavy beams, shielding the boy from sparks and smoke. His strength strained, muscles burning, lungs aching, but he did not stop. When the path was clear, he pushed the boy ahead, guiding him out just as part of the structure gave way behind them. They emerged coughing, eyes watering, but alive. The rancher handed the boy to another rider and returned to the fight without pause. The tide had turned. With leadership restored and morale hardened by near disaster, the townspeople pressed forward. One by one, the bandits were subdued, disarmed, and bound. When the last resistance fell, the canyon grew quiet again, broken only by the crackle of dying flames and labored breathing. The cost was not insignificant. Several people were injured, though none fatally. The rancher moved among them, offering support, binding wounds, and ensuring no one was left behind. When the fire died down, they gathered what supplies remained and prepared to return. The bandits were escorted under guard, their threat ended at last. The journey back was slower, marked by exhaustion and reflection. The boy rode beside the rancher, silent, shame and gratitude mixing in his expression. The rancher said nothing, placing a steady hand on the boy's shoulder, a simple gesture that conveyed more than words could. Lessons had been learned, not through lectures, but through experience. The town welcomed them as heroes, but the celebration was subdued. They understood the weight of what had happened, the fragile line between safety and loss. The bandits were dealt with, but the frontier would always hold danger. What mattered was how they faced it, together. In the days that followed, life gradually found a new balance. Repairs were made, supplies redistributed, and routines re-established. The rancher returned to his land more often, though he remained connected to the town. He had become a symbol of something larger than himself, a reminder that courage and compassion could shape the fate of many. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and purple, the rancher stood outside his cabin, watching the horizon. The land was still vast and wild, indifferent to human struggles, yet he no longer felt alone within it. The faces of those he had helped, the trust they placed in him, had woven him into a community he had never intended to join, but now could not imagine leaving. The girl and the boy visited together, bringing food and stories from town. They laughed, shared memories, and spoke of small dreams, simple futures shaped by survival and hope. The rancher listened, feeling a quiet pride settle within him. He had not sought to change lives, yet in doing what felt right, he had done exactly that. As night fell, stars emerged, cold and brilliant against the dark sky. The rancher reflected on the path that had brought him here. The storm, the rescue, the fights, the choices. Each moment had tested him, pushed him beyond comfort, and revealed strengths he had not known he possessed. The frontier was unforgiving, but it also rewarded those willing to stand for others. He knew peace would never be permanent, that challenges would return in different forms. But he also knew that fear no longer ruled the land as it once had. They had faced darkness and emerged stronger, bound by shared resolve. And in that knowledge, beneath the vast sky of the Wild West, the rancher found something he had not realized he was searching for. Not fame, not recognition, but belonging. The seasons began to shift slowly after that. Snow melted into streams that carved new lines through the land, and the harsh white of winter gave way to muted greens and browns. Life on the frontier never truly rested, but it softened, if only slightly. The rancher noticed the change not just in the land, but in himself. Mornings no longer felt as heavy. The silence that once pressed down on him now felt companionable rather than lonely. He still rose before dawn, still worked until his muscles ached, but there was purpose in every movement beyond simple survival. The town grew stronger. Children laughed more openly in the streets, wagons traveled with less fear, and people greeted one another with a familiarity born from shared hardship. The bandits were gone, but their shadow lingered as a reminder of what could happen if vigilance faded. Because of that, the rancher continued to train others. Not as soldiers, but as protectors of their own lives and land. He taught them awareness, patience, and restraint. He reminded them that strength without compassion was just another form of danger. One afternoon, while repairing a fence near the edge of his property, the rancher noticed a familiar figure approaching. It was the girl, now healthier and stronger, walking with confidence instead of fear. She carried a small bundle in her arms. When she reached him, she smiled and handed it over. Inside was a simple scarf, hand-stitched, uneven in places, but made with care. She told him it was to keep him warm when winter returned. He accepted it quietly, his throat tightening in a way he did not expect. Gratitude settled deep in his chest, heavier than any praise the town had ever given him. As time passed, the boy grew as well. He learned quickly, absorbing lessons not just about the land, but about responsibility. The rancher never told him to be brave. Instead, he taught him to be prepared, to think before acting, and to understand that courage often meant choosing patience over impulse. The boy listened, sometimes stumbling, sometimes succeeding, but always trying. In him, the rancher saw a future shaped not by fear, but by wisdom earned through guidance. One night, a distant storm rolled across the plains. Thunder echoed, not violent like before, but steady and controlled. Rain fell softly, tapping against the cabin roof. The rancher sat by the fire, the scarf draped over a chair nearby, and reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He thought about the man he had been before the storm, before the cries in the wind, before responsibility found him. He had believed solitude was safety, that distance from others meant peace. Now he understood that true peace came from connection, from choosing to act when action mattered most. The storm passed without incident. Morning arrived clear and bright, sunlight spilling across the land. The rancher stepped outside and took in the view, breathing deeply. The horizon stretched endlessly, just as it always had. But it felt different now. It was no longer something to endure alone. It was something to protect. Weeks later, travelers began passing through again, drawn by the reputation of a town that looked after its own. Stories spread, carried by word of mouth rather than desire for fame. A lone rancher. A storm. A child saved. A community united. The rancher never corrected these stories, nor did he add to them. He knew the truth lived not in words, but in actions repeated day after day. One evening, As the sun dipped low and painted the sky with fire, the rancher rode out across the plains. Not because he was searching for trouble, but because he understood the land required watchfulness. As he rode, he felt something rare and powerful. Contentment, not the absence of danger, but the presence of meaning. He stopped at a rise and looked back toward the town. Smoke curled from chimneys. Lights flickered to life. People lived, worked, and dreamed there, unaware of how fragile that peace truly was, yet determined to protect it. The rancher nodded once, to himself, and turned back toward home. The Wild West would always be wild. Storms would return. Threats would rise. But as long as there were people willing to stand for others, to choose courage over comfort, and compassion over fear, there would always be hope. The land remembered those choices. So did the people. And as the rancher rode into the fading light, one truth remained clear. A single act of kindness, performed in the darkest moment, could change countless lives forever. If you enjoyed this story and want to experience more powerful, emotional Wild West stories filled with courage, humanity, and unforgettable moments, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next story.